Good afternoon, everyone. It is 2 p.m., so it's already a recite the seminar. Actually, I realize I don't have my own energy with me. Can I ask everyone to please join me in Kasha? No more notes. No more notes. No more notes. No more notes. Well, thank you all for coming this afternoon. On this rainy afternoon. We were so lucky last week when we had sunshine, and so, but it is still very nice that we're able to gather together in a warm environment. So we are very lucky to have Reverend Hayashi from the Tri-State Denver Buddhist Temple. And so Reverend Hayashi is originally from Kyoto, Japan, and moved to the United States in 2016. He was first assigned to Ekoji Buddhist Temple in Virginia, and then assigned to Tri-State Denver Buddhist Temple in Colorado as the head minister in 2022. He has been sharing a lecture based on his unique experience at Ekoji Buddhist Temple. Through today's lecture, he wants to share his view of the Dharma to help evolve everyone's understanding. So thank you very much, Hayashi Sensei, and yoroshiku onegaishimasu.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Thank you all for being here for me. So I'm currently at the Denver Buddhist Temple in Colorado, and as you may know, there's like 55 plus. Temples, Buddhist, Shin Buddhist temples of the BCA in this United States, and as Reverend Cindy mentioned, my first assignment as the overseas minister was Virginia, and most of the temple of the 55 are located on the West Coast. So there's like around 50 in California. And on the east, there's only 5 temples. One is New York, New Jersey, Virginia, Cleveland, Ohio, and Chicago. And especially, the temple I was in, Ekoji, is a very unique temple, and my experience at Ekoji kind of dramatically changed my understanding of what is Buddhism. So that's kind of what I want to share today. So the title is Propagation on the East. And in talking about Ekoji, I first want to introduce to you a minister. His name is Reverend Kenryu Tsuji. So Reverend Tsuji, he was the first Japanese American bishop of the Buddhist Churches of America. Until then, it was all Japanese ministers who came from Japan. But Reverend Tsuji, he's originally from Canada. And he led the congregation of Toronto Buddhist Church in Canada until 1959, when he got an invitation from the bishop at that time of Buddhist Churches of America, Bishop Shige Fuji, to serve as the director of the newly called Bureau of Buddhist Education, currently the CBE, the Central Buddhist Education. And after that, he became the bishop in 1968 as the bishop of the Buddhist Churches of America. And then the next person I want to introduce to you is Reverend Dr. Ehan Numata. So Reverend Dr. Ehan Numata was born in Hiroshima, Japan, and he once was an overseas minister just like me. And he was located, he was relocated to Hawaii as an overseas minister. But then he moved to Berkeley, California to receive his master's degrees. And in 1934, Reverend Dr. Numata, he established his own company called Mitsutoyo Corporation to manufacture precise measuring instruments. And today there are Mitsutoyo branches in over 25 countries around the world. So he created his own company, and the company is still successful. But this company, he did not establish this company because he wanted to become rich. This company was a means for him to attain his original objective, which is to enable more people to learn about Buddhism. Not only the Japanese, but people all over the world. But he needed money. That's why he created his own company. And then with that profit, he published Buddhist, articles, books, and he did, lectures. It was his belief that the attainment of world peace is possible only by the perfection of the human mind, which can be educated and benefited from the teachings of the Buddha. He then initiated what is called the Bukkyo Dendo Kyokai. He founded Bukkyo Dendo Kyokai, we call it BDK Japan, as a public organization. Now these two people, they came together, but it kind of started by Reverend Suji. What I heard was he was always wondering, there's like 50 plus temples on the west, but there wasn't even a single one near the capital of the US. So after his retirement from the bishop position in 1981, Reverend Suji, and along with Reverend Numata, who shared the same vision, founded Ekoji. So this is a picture of the temple in Ekoji. So basically, Reverend Numata funded all the money, and then Reverend Suji led the congregation. And this is Ekoji Buddhist Temple. As you can see, the Naijing, the main altar part is very simple. It doesn't have any, shiny things. And, here, if you could see the shape, this is the robe. And then the center is not a statue of Amida, but it's the 6 characters of Namo Amida Butsu. Yeah, so it's a very simple temple, Naijing. And, some ministers like it, others not, because it's not really traditional. Personally, I really liked it. It's not that I hate, the original version, but because it's simple, your total focus is in the center. So I think that's what really, matters. So I personally really liked this temple. And this temple, you have to take off your shoes. Yeah, I know. I did not do that. I did not start that. It was that way, which I kind of liked it because, you're kind of separating yourself from the outside world, and you're entering something different, something, nice, clean, So I personally liked it, and they still continue to take off their shoes. But this is Ekoji Buddhist Temple. And Ekoji Buddhist Temple is probably the only temple in Buddhist churches of America, among the 50-something temples, that was not established by the Japanese immigrant community. Most of the temples were built by the Japanese people. This temple was not. This temple was built by Reverend Suji's question, like, why don't we have a temple near the capital? So in that way, Ekoji is very unique, and to to further talk about the uniqueness, I want to kind of touch on the ethnicity and population of Ekoji. I do not have the official number, but so I served at Ekoji for 6.5 years. In fact, I'm one of those Japanese ministers who came from Japan, and I was assigned to Ekoji, and one of the ministers, his name is Reverend Hanayama. He unfortunately passed away at the age of 55. But at one of the meetings, I was fresh, I was new. Actually, I attended this meeting even before going to Virginia. But at that meeting, he would come to me and he would say, oh, I heard that you're going to be assigned to Ekoji. And then, and I'm like, yeah. And I thought he was going to wish my best and my love. But he said, you're not going to last there. Yeah. And then he said, you're not going to last there for 3 years. And I felt a little upset because I haven't even been to Virginia, and now he's saying I'm not going to last. I haven't even started. So I asked him, what if I do? And then he said, what do you want? And I said, I want a new car. And then we were like, deal. After 3 years, he passed away. So I still don't have my car. And not only that, but I served 6.5 years, and I was looking forward to spend more time in Virginia, but then the current bishop called me and he said, can you move to Denver? I said no. Because I didn't want to move, packing everything, and it's too much. So I said no, but he said no. I'm a bishop. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm sorry. But I did tell him, can you wait another year? There's a lot of things that I want to do at Koji. And he said, okay, a year. After a year, he called me and said, now it's time. And I said, can I have another year? He got really upset, so I said, okay. And then I came to Denver. But speaking of the ethnicity and population of Ekoji that I experienced, and again, this is not an official number. I would say 60% is Caucasians.
Oh.
Yeah, so, and then the Japanese population, since this was not built by the Japanese community, there's not much Japanese Americans there, so I would say less than 15%. There is a decent amount of Vietnamese people, which is interesting. And then the others are African Americans, India, Sri Lanka, China, Philippines. There was an Iranian family, the Asif Barki family, and then there was people from France, Slovenia. So it's a very diverse temple, very. And the reason why there's a certain amount of Vietnamese is, I once asked one of the family, and they said, yeah, there's a lot of Vietnamese temples, and we can go there, but they do not speak English, so we can understand what they're saying, but our kids cannot. That's why they started to come to a temple where they teach Buddhism in English. So, and then the other families of the Vietnamese joined. So that's why we have, a certain amount of Vietnamese. But as you can see, it's a very diverse congregation, and I think this is, this makes Ekoji very unique. And next, I want to talk about, the purpose of visiting Ekoji. So, as most of the temples of the Buddhist churches of America were, laid by the Japanese people, so the Japanese population, as well as the Japanese cultural aspect, is very strong in most of the temples. But at Ekoji, talking with a lot of people, most of them did not have any connection with Japan. They were not necessarily interested in Japanese culture. They were not married to a Japanese person or had a Japanese descendant. So people who came to Ekoji were really genuinely seeking the teaching and guidance. So this kind of differs, when you compare Ekoji and other, Buddhist churches of America, the temples, that it's not about the community, but it's more about, the teaching. And since, Ekoji is in the Washington, D.C. area, there are a lot of members who, or visitors who work for the government, and also the military, the Navy, Army, Air Force. And I had the privilege to officiate a retirement ceremony at the Pentagon for a general of Air Force, General Tim Cathcart. He was a member of Ekoji Buddhist Temple. I was the first Buddhist minister who officiated a retired ceremony in the Pentagon. Usually it's Christian, tradition. But because, he was a member of Ekoji, he asked me if I can do. And I don't know if you have been inside the Pentagon, but the security is so tight. You need to bring your passport, you need to bring additional ID, you have to go through this gate and, all the security. But it was a very profound experience, to officiate a retirement ceremony for General Tim Cathcart. And of course, I also had many opportunities to conduct interment ceremonies or gravesite ceremonies at the Arlington National Cemetery for the veterans who were Buddhist. And in talking about Ekoji, I also have to mention another person, Reverend Shoujo Honda. So after Reverend Tsuji's retirement from Ekoji Buddhist Temple, he became the next minister. And from what I heard, Reverend Honda, he was also an overseas minister of Buddhist Churches of America, like me. But he resigned from his status and he moved to the Washington, D.C. area, and he established his own group, the Washington, D.C. Sangha. And which met at his house, and held many services at his residence. And aside serving the Washington, D.C. Sangha, Reverend Honda, he worked at the Library of Congress of the Japanese section and Asian division. Then he was asked by Reverend Tsuji to serve as a minister of Ekoji. However, Reverend Honda, he was not comfortable serving as the main minister position, and he was no longer overseas minister of BCA. So he became a part-time minister of Ekoji, but he refused any salary, any honorarium from the temple. He just dedicated himself, so he did not receive any. He refused to receive any payment. And being in our nation's capital, Ekoji played a key role in how Buddhism was recognized as a religion in the U.S. Reverend Honda was actually involved in that movement of demanding the U.S. government so that they can acknowledge Buddhism as a religion. And now you can see the wheel of Dharma carved on tombstones at cemeteries. For the deceased who were Buddhist. And Reverend Umezu, the former bishop, was a bishop at my time. He was the one who assigned me to Ekoji. And it's another story, but so when I went through all the training and he invited me to become a minister of BCA, he gave me two options. He said, would you want to go a temple in California, or would you want to go a temple in Virginia? As I said, I'm from Japan. I didn't know where Virginia was. So I immediately said California, because there's a lot of, all the temples are so close by, you can get a lot of support by the other ministers, and also there's a big Japanese culture and community there. So I said, yeah, definitely California. But then suddenly he started to talk about crabs. He said, do you like blue crabs? And it was an international call. I was in Japan, and he was in San Francisco. He's calling me, and he's talking about crabs, saying, you like crabs? And I'm like, why is he talking about crabs? And I said, yeah, I do. And then he said, in Maryland, there's a Chesapeake Bay, and they have a lot of good crabs. And I'm like, yeah, thank you for the information, but I would like to, receive my assignment in California. Next, he started to talk about Virginia peanuts. He started to talk how crunchier it was than California peanuts. I didn't care at all, but he kept doing that. So I assumed that, there was no option. He said 2 options, but there was no option. So I gave up and I said, okay, just send me wherever you want. And then I ended up at a coach. But another thing was he wanted me to learn under Reverend Honda, because he was such a unique, he's a minister from Japan, Osaka, Japan. But because of his unique experience, he wanted me to learn under him. But unfortunately, he passed away 5 months before my arrival. I already got my assignment, and I was packing. It took a year. I had to do all the documentations, all the stuff. And I was ready to go, but he passed away before my arrival. So I didn't, have a chance to meet him. But he is one of the key person of the Koji Buddhist Temple. And of course, as I said, I served for 6.5 years, and I moved to Denver Buddhist Temple like 3 years ago. But when I look back at my experience, I realize how much I have changed in many ways. Especially my understanding of the Dharma, the teaching, changed dramatically. I didn't really realize it when I was at Koji, but when I moved away from Koji, I kind of realized how my understanding has changed, and that is why I put together this a presentation. And I have been doing this presentation at all sorts of places. I did it at Palo Alto Buddhist Temple. I did it at I think it's Orange County, and then I'm going to do it at Central Cal next year. And a couple other places I can't remember, but I've been doing this to share, how my mind shift, how my understanding has changed. I struggled a lot. I first struggled coming from Japan to America. I didn't know how to, fill my gas in my car. Honestly, no, I really didn't. And this country is, credit card based, but in Japan it's cash. So I didn't know the payment. I once went into Chipotle. I didn't know what it was, but I was hungry and I needed food. And then it looked like a fast food, so I could just go in and get out. So I went in, and then you have to line in, right? And then you have to choose what you want. But I didn't know the entire system. I was hoping that they would, explain that to me. And I was in line. It was my turn, and then that person was literally like this. They didn't say anything. I was hoping an explanation, and then I was like, kind of stumbling, and then that person was like. So that was my first, experience. It's cultural difference. It's huge. I struggled a lot. Life was really hard, and at one point I started to think maybe I don't fit here. Maybe I should go back. But I now can say that it was those struggles that led me to open my mind, to think in a very different way, and appreciate life. When I was the first couple years, I really complained a lot about the bishop sending me to Ekoji. But right now, I really appreciate that he sent me to Ekoji. Otherwise, I wouldn't be the person I am right now, and I wouldn't even be standing here today. So, for the other half of my presentation, I want to share just 3 important points. I learned during my surgery at Koji, and I always try to keep these 3 points in my mind as I further learn about the Dharma. So maybe I'll share each point, and I'll kind of ask for questions, or we can take a break. But 3 points, and the first one, what I want to share is how we should not take the words in the sutras literally. That we should not take the words in the Buddhist texts literally. In other words, when we read Buddhist sutras, we must understand that the truth in Buddhism is not necessarily factual. Okay? Truth in Buddhism is not necessarily factual. Because Virginia is part of the Bible Belt, there are many Christian churches, and that means that there were a lot of people who came to Koji who had Christian backgrounds. Whether they abandoned their Christian background or they continued but they want to seek something else. And speaking with them, I realized how there were a lot of people who interpreted the words in the Bible literally.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Very.
Yeah. So that's what I realized. Because most of the people who left Christianity, who came to the temple, they were raised in that Christian tradition. And were taught how the Bible was the words of God. So many people took the words in the Bible literally. However, in Buddhism, we say that sutras are the teachings of Buddha, but we don't say they are the words of Buddha. We say, the teachings of Buddha. And let me talk about the history of sutras, especially in our Mahayana streams. There's 3 main streams in Buddhism: the Mahayana, Theravada, and Vajrayana. The Vajrayana is basically the Tibetan tradition. The Theravada is what the group that's traveled south from India, Nepal area, Cambodia, Burma. And then the north that traveled is the Mahayana, and our denomination, our tradition is in that Mahayana stream. But I want to kind of talk about the history of sutra in especially the Mahayana stream to discuss this issue. So history tells us that the earliest Mahayana sutras appeared 500 years later, the historical Buddhas in Shakyamuni's death. Shakyamuni, the founder of Buddhism. In Mahayana, the sutras appeared 500 years later his death. Since they gradually emerged over centuries after Shakyamuni's lifetime, some argue, they still argue, that Mahayana sutras were not uttered directly by Shakyamuni, so they are not his teaching. This is a still ongoing thing. That there are some tradition thinks that, your sutras that you use appeared 500 later Shakyamuni's death, so it's not his teaching. On the other hand, other argues that Mahayana sutras are Shakyamuni's teaching. It is because all Mahayana sutras begin with the same phrase, "Thus I have heard." So this is the words of Shakyamuni's first disciple, Ananda. So that is possible that they were orally transmitted so accurately by him that they gave those who wrote them down Shakyamuni's exact teachings. So there's still this 2 theories going on. And it is still not clear which of these theories are correct. But if Mahayana sutras are not the exact words of Shakyamuni, they still contain the essence of the truth of his enlightenment as its core. I don't know how many sutras you have read, but those Mahayana sutras are very profound. It's very deep and wonderful. And I think the quality of their truth is the best evidence that they have in them the heart of Buddha. And in fact, some Buddhist scholars say that if Shakyamuni lived for several centuries, he would have taught us the truth the way it is written in the Mahayana Sutras we read today. The truth in Mahayana, however, is not factual. It is not factual. Mahayana Sutras that we read, including the sutras, the three Pure Land Sutras that our teaching is based on, they do not tell of things that happened to like gods and men, and they are not a record of events as a history would be. They also do not discuss religious ideas or try to explain philosophical concepts. Most of the Mahayana Sutras tell stories. To paraphrase Dr. Rita Gross, a Buddhist feminist scholar, who said, "Sutras that are viewed by Mahayanists as an accurate account of the words of the historical Buddha Shakyamuni cannot be considered historical if by history we mean, as we usually do, a factual narrative about things that happened empirically, events that a camcorder could have recorded had it existed at that time, something that could be included in a documentary."
That's a cool quote.
Yeah.
Yes.
I accidentally found this quote. I was like, wow. It's like,
That's great.
yeah.
Thank you.
And then Rita Gross, she continues on and said, "Novels, films, plays, these can be entirely fictional. Yet we all know they can nevertheless communicate values and meanings. Religious stories do not have to be empirical history to have spiritual values."
So there's difference between facts and truth.
Yes. So the point is, the Buddhist stories are not about facts, but they are about they are about truths. So sutras are sacred texts. It's very sacred for us, but not in the sense of the Bible, which is considered as the words of God. The term Buddha, when we use the word Buddha, we usually refer to Shakyamuni, the founder of Buddhism, Shakyamuni Buddha. But the term Buddha is more than an individual. Mahayana Buddhism, our tradition, our stream of Mahayana, has the idea that the ultimate nature of Buddha is beyond dualistic reasoning and verbal description, and so is inconceivable in terms of general knowledge. That is how we understand Buddha in Mahayana. One way to understand the nature of the sutras is to say that it is like a finger of a person pointing at the moon. So the moon is the inconceivable truth, and the finger is the sutra. So the finger, that is the sutra, therefore, is not the truth itself, like it is in the Bible. But it is a guide to the moon, to the inconceivable truth of Buddha. And for this reason, we should not take the words of the sutras literally. And this is especially so because sutras are thought in Mahayana Buddhism as an expedient means by which the infinite character of the inconceivable nature of Buddha can be expressed in finite human terms. So, there is an importance that Shinran, our founder, in particular, placed on reading the meanings behind the words, and not just the words itself. So I think it's like, like lyric writers and songs. For the lines to rhyme, the words that the lyric writers can use are minimal. But often they express much more than just what is in the meanings of the words. Thus, what becomes essential for us is to seek the meaning and idea behind the words and not take the words literally. In this regard, Master Taido Matsubara, he's a master of Rinzai Zen Buddhism. He says, read sutras like you would read literatures. You must seek the idea and meaning behind the words you see. Cultivate the words like plowing a field to find the truth. And when we, seek the deeper meaning behind the words in the sutras, many superficial questions becomes unnecessary. For example, consider the largest sutra. This is one of our fundamental sutra, the largest sutra that talks about a bodhisattva named Dharmakara establishing Pure Land and becoming Amida Buddha. This is kind of the short summary of our teaching. Dharmakara Bodhisattva establishing the Pure Land for all sentient beings, for the sake of all sentient beings, and finally becoming Amida Buddha. So once we understand that sutras have to be considered as stories or parables because the issues that they discuss go beyond human reason and are inconceivable, well, once we understand this, then questions that I often hear, such as, is Amida a deity? What is the gender of Amida? Is Pure Land real? Where is Pure Land? All of these become less pressing. And even more, what is crucial becomes very clear. Understanding that sutras are like the finger pointing the moon, we direct our attention to the moon. That is to say, we should think about what the stories are teaching us. What is it that we gain through the story instead of thinking whether or not it is based on facts? In this regard, it is extremely important for us as we learn about the Jodo Shinshu teaching that we should not take the words in the sutras literally. So this is the first point. Before, these 3 points, they will end up as one point. It looks like 3 different points. But I just wanted to, if there's any questions or thoughts, I'm not sure if you have heard something like this. I don't know how much ministers would talk about this importance. But if there's any questions, thoughts.
Sorry, I'm going to have to go around with the mic.
In Christianity, especially the more conservative parts of Christianity, there's an ongoing debate, which is sometimes rather acrimonious, about in the New Testament what are the words of Jesus that he actually spoke, and what are the words in the New Testament that are kind of glossed on the words of Jesus. And it's friends debate as the controversy about the historical Jesus. What did he teach? What did he really teach? Is there anything analogous to that in Buddhist scholarship?
I actually started to learn about Christianity. So I'm kind of digging into Christianity. The reason why I'm doing this is because when you consider the world, what's going on, I think a lot of people are thinking that I'm right and you're wrong.
Yeah.
And they start to fight. I think religion works the same way, that if you think that, I would never say Shin Buddhism, ours, I would never say that Jodo Shinshu Buddhism is the best. I would never say that. And one time I said to a new member, it was a visitor, and I said, thanks for coming. I hope you had a pleasant experience. And I was talking and said, but Shin Buddhism is not the best. And he was like, what? Minister saying that your teaching is not the best. He was like, that's so crazy. But I think the reason why I say this is because Shin Buddhism, the teaching of Shin Buddhism is best for me.
Yeah.
I do not know if it's best for other people. So I want other people to find their path. It's best for me. But I shouldn't talk as if it's the best of the world. If I start to do that, then there's going to be conflict. In any case, for that reason, I started to learn about Christianity. And I think the Bible it's beautiful. It's very profound, Bible. But I do see some kind of problem. It's pretty dangerous that the way it's taught is like kind of questionable sometimes. Okay. For instance, in the Old Testament, it says, "Love thy neighbor." I heard from one pastor, Christian pastor, I won't say which denomination, but he was talking that love thy neighbor, the word neighbor means your Christian fellow. It means the people who believe in God. Right? I do not think Jesus said in that sense. Jesus was emphasizing the importance of love, of all beings. So I would not disagree when that pastor said, love thy neighbor means. Of course, he's talking to his congregation, not knowing that there was a Buddhist minister there. Right? So probably, he just slipped out of his mouth. But so I do not know if the Bible is the exact words of Jesus. But perhaps that's not the point.
Bingo.
Yeah. Even the largest sutra, like our largest sutra, this was established, as I said, 500 years later. And as I said, there's a debate that, then it's not, Shakyamuni's teaching. But then, when you think about it, for over 2,500 years, there's thousands of people who appreciated this Large Sutra, who realized comfort within them, knowing that they are always embraced by the compassion of Amida. That's the evidence. It's not about, so it doesn't really matter if it was Jesus' word or Shakyamuni's word. As long as there are people who receive, this comfort, a sense of gratitude, I think that's what matters. So I would say that any kind of teachings that gives comfort to people is valid.
Well, even in the narrow context of who is my neighbor, there's one of the great parables of Jesus, the prodigal son of the Good Samaritan, which is revolves around the question, who is my neighbor?
Yes.
Who is your neighbor?
Exactly, yes.
Which, by the way, is never answered in the
Yes.
Yes. That's ambiguous.
That story is also interpreted in many different ways.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right, yes.
Which is the whole point of the story.
Yes.
For it to be interpreted.
But I do believe Jesus' hope was love among humanity. It's not only this people or that people. It's the humanity. So, I'm not sure if I answered your question.
No, you did.
Yeah, but the whole point is looking at, all the people who have been, receiving this comfort, and, I think that's the best evidence of how, the largest sutra is valid in our tradition. So if there's, yes.
So the questions that are there that are grayed out, is Amida, Buddha, a deity, etc. Where is the Pure Land? When you have members that come to you and ask questions like that, especially people new to Buddhism, how do you handle that? Because sometimes people want concrete answers, and you can say, hand pointing to the moon. That's kind of for somebody who's new, it's kind of a dissatisfying answer, I think.
Right.
So I'm curious how you handle those kinds of questions when they're brought to you.
So I would avoid answering that question specifically, okay, I would address the importance of questions and answers. Okay? We human beings, we want answers. And when you think about why we want answers, it's because it's easy. You don't have to think. You don't have to struggle. And there are scholars who are saying that's why Christianity is popular. Because it's like this. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just, pointing out that. But, Buddhism, I don't think Buddhism does not give an answer. It gives a question. And, the Buddhist sutras, most of the sutras, they do not start by Shakyamuni speaking directly. Immediately. It starts from questions by the disciple and Shakyamuni addressing it with them. So that kind of shows how question is what matters. And also, we want answers. But the problem is that when we receive an answer, what happens is that we stop there. We stop there. We shut out everything out. All the possibilities. It's the answer. But when you get a question, that question leads to the next question, which leads to the next question. So it allows us to walk. And also, I'm not even sure if there's any absolute answer, because whatever, I ate this burger, right? And it's so good. I love this burger. It's the best burger. I'm gonna eat this, frequently. Even if that's the answer, you will never know the next day. When you wake up and you feel, oh no, that burger was too much for me, right? Then what is that answer? So, it's not the answer, but the question is what allows us to walk forward. And the question is a way that we can engage with other people. People are holding too much of their answer, and they're stuck with that, right? And if another person points out, denies the answer, then they fight. It's like, what are we doing, right? But if it's a question, we can share that question, and we start to talk with other people. And also, we walk towards. We just continue to walk, and that is why. We say that Buddhism is a lifelong process. It's not like, oh, I'm enlightened. We practice until we die. Unfortunately, we do. But, it's because, Buddhism lays all these questions. And Reverend Kaiketsu Unno, he's one of the most, famous Buddhist scholar, he said, anyone can attain enlightenment. In Jodo Shinshu, we kind of deny that we cannot attain enlightenment with our own power, but he says anyone can attain enlightenment. But he also says, but it is never a state where you can say, I have attained.
Yeah.
So, in one way, you will never know when we are enlightened. But in another way, the Buddhist practice becomes a lifelong practice. So that's why, when I get such question, I wouldn't say whether Amida is deity or not, but I would more talk about, the process of thinking about the truth in Buddhism. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I don't know. I don't even know if Amida is a deity or not. The teaching says it's not a deity, but how can we know? What is the gender of Amida? I don't know. I don't even know if there's a gender or not. But that's not even the point. That's not the point. So if that's not the point, I would never answer that. I would kind of work around talking about how we think about things. And
I was just going to say, and I don't think that I've been allowed enough questions. Online. Oh, sorry.
Buddhism to me allows me the freedom. I'm not centered on something. I have the freedom to ask questions, to explore as I am able. And I'm grateful.
But I think that's life, that's how it should be.
Well, it's not for everybody.
Yeah, that's why we have to propagate, but yeah, thank you for your comment. I think that's kind of, the Buddhist attitude. If you're stuck with one answer, you're not only stuck there, but you kind of close everything. And that's the cause of division that's happening in this country, that people are too attached to their own righteousness, not knowing that others have their righteousness. But how right can you be? Right? No, this is kind of a question that, I kind of shared this a couple times, that when I was in Japan, I wasn't a Buddhist, I was a teenager, and one day I was walking and I saw this person on the street, probably a homeless, and then he was on the street, not on the sidewalk, so I thought it was kind of dangerous, and I always wanted to be a good person, a better person, so I went over and said, is there anything I can do? Do you have? Is there any problems? Then that person, the reaction was kind of unexpected. That he started to yell at me, and basically he was saying that I didn't ask for help, right? And I got so upset because I went over and I didn't have to, but I did. And I tried to help, but I was kind of rejected. So when I think about that incident right now, I was wrong. Because I believe that helping this person is the right thing. But for that person, it was wrong. That's why he rejected me. And some people ask me, okay, then what if you encounter kind of a similar situation? What would you do? I would say, I will still go over and help. I will. But because of this, experience, I think I'll be able to, if it's the same situation, I go over and then if that person rejects me, I think I can just let it go. Because I'm always already aware that I was wrong in the past. So I will help. I will, because it's an important factor. Not as a Buddhist, but as a human. This awareness is kind of the key point of Buddhism, that, Buddhism is not denying your righteousness. Buddhism is rather saying that, you can have your own righteousness and believe in it, but you have to understand that others have their own righteousness as well. Once we become aware of that, we start to listen to other people. We start to listen to people who disagree. We don't have to agree with them, but we listen. I think this is the first step of unity that this country is seeking. People don't listen. That's why there's nothing. But if we can open up and start to listen, even though we disagree, I think that kind of opens a lot of possibilities. That gives you questions. We share that questions, and then we move along. But thank you for sharing your comment. If there's no other questions, I'll move to the next point. So my next point is to value the idea of middle way. So middle way is a very important concept in Buddhism. And it was laid out Vasubandhu ですよね。Vasubandhu です。中道 Yeah, one of the Indian philosophers. In any case, this idea of middle way is a very important concept in especially in learning about the Buddha's teaching, and it's also an ideal attitude in life. This middle way, it sounds very easy, but it's actually very complicated. I kind of tried to dig into it, but it's so complicated. Nothing starts if I keep saying it's complicated. So just to put it simply, it means it's the idea of avoiding extremes. Because in life, when we think of things, we often make these absolute separations in which we set things in opposition, such as right and wrong, good and bad, black and white, positive, negative, winner and loser. And we not only set up these opposing extreme opinions, but also we take an extreme position on one side or the other. Of course, Buddhism does not deny how we set things in opposition, since it is a way for us to understand things. When we see something, especially new, for the first time, we immediately divide it into two factors. Is it good for me? Is it bad for me? So it is a way to understand, but Buddhism warns more about taking an extreme position on one side or the other. And you can in fact see the idea of middle way, not the idea, but the attitude of middle way in Shakyamuni's lifetime. So for example, there's a story when Shakyamuni, he turned 80, he was on a journey to teach the Dharma along with his first disciple Ananda. And dragging his aged body, Shakyamuni traveled from the Vulture Peak in a place called Rajigraha, crossing the Ganges River, visiting many villages. Ananda, his first disciple, who started to accompany Shakyamuni on his journey of propagation at a very young age, was already in his mid-50s. So that's how long, they were continuing this journey of propagation. And on the midway of the journey, Shakyamuni and Ananda, they stopped at a village called Pava. And at this village, Shakyamuni taught the Dharma to a blacksmith, and his name is Chunda. Greatly inspired by Shakyamuni's teaching, Chunda invited them to a feast as an offering. And Shakyamuni and Ananda accepted Chunda's invitation. However, the meal Chunda prepared was unsuitable given Shakyamuni's health condition and age. And after the meal, Shakyamuni suffered from severe diarrhea and hemorrhage, but he continued on his journey to Kushinagar. And Shakyamuni, assuming how it might be his last day of his life, stopped at a river called the Kutak River to rest. And Shakyamuni, he's lying down on the shore of the river. He told Ananda to never criticize Chunda's offering to others. And this conversation is in fact recorded in a sutra called Mahaparinirvana Sutra. And according to the sutra, Shakyamuni, he said to his disciple Ananda, "There will be people who would say that because I died from eating Chunda's meal, Chunda lacks virtue. If so, tell Chunda the following words to release his guilt and his feeling of regret. Brother, I selected your meal as my last meal. Thus, you do not lack virtue." And Shakyamuni, he continues on and says, "I have received 2 great offerings in life, and both offerings were equivalently distinguished and full of virtues. One offering is from Sujata, that led me to realize enlightenment, and the other one was from you, Chunda, which I accepted as the last meal of my life. After your offering, finally, I was able to enter nirvana, the state of peace and quietness, so your offering was indeed virtuous." So this is recorded in the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, and in these words of Shakyamuni, he said one great first offering that he received was from Sujata. Now, I don't know if you know this story, that Sujata was a village girl who, offered this bowl of goat milk to Shakyamuni when he was physically and mentally in pain after 6 years of, those practicing austerities, all those difficult practices, which almost killed himself. And after recovering from pain with the help of Sujata's offering, then Shakyamuni, he sat under the tree called a Bodhi tree, and promising that he'll never leave the place until he finds the truth. And on the 49th day, he attained enlightenment. So Sujata was a person who offered this, goat milk, so that Shakyamuni can recover, and then he attained enlightenment. Thus, the bowl of goat milk offered by Sujata was what led Shakyamuni to enlightenment. And Shakyamuni said that her offering, Sujata's offering, which led him to enlightenment, was equivalent to Chunda's offering, which led him to death. It's kind of funny, And this is actually a very important point that we should not overlook, because this shows how Shakyamuni saw death and enlightenment, which seems to be the opposite, as one and the same. This means death for Shakyamuni was not something negative, as we usually think of, but as enlightenment, it was something natural and valuable. Moreover, Shakyamuni referred to death this way because he saw it as nirvana, which is when all anxiety, uneasiness, and other sufferings are all extinguished. In this regard, in the Parinirvana Sutra, it is stated, there are two events that are extremely beautiful. One is when enlightenment is attained, and the other is when our defilements are extinguished completely, thus nirvana. Now, Ananda, let us head to Sala Grove, where I can enter extinction. Thus, extinction is a state when all defilements that are causing, all our selfish desires that are causing our suffering are gone, which is usually referred to as nirvana. And that is why Shakyamuni said Chunda's offering that led him to death was as virtuous as Sujata's offering that led him to enlightenment. But this does not mean that we should go ahead and die so that we can attain enlightenment. In fact, Shakyamuni, he did not kill himself, but he taught his teaching to his followers until he drew his last breath. My point is rather that Shakyamuni did not see death and enlightenment as two separate things. He saw two opposing things as the two sides of the same coin. And a person who was greatly inspired by the view of Shakyamuni was Shinran, our founder. In a poem of Shoshinge, it's one of our chanting we do, written by Shinran, there's a section where he says, we multitude of beings who reside in times of great defilements should trust in the truth of Shakyamuni Buddha's teaching and thus avoid beguilements. So, as you can see, he really trusted Shakyamuni's attitude of embracing the contradiction instead of separating them into two. Just for your information, this is where it's in Gojokakuji Bunjokai Hoshinyogai no Jitsugo. This is part of the Shoshinge. And Shinran also had an attitude of seeing two opposing things as one. In the Shoshinge, another section, Shinran said, Nirvana is attained without severing our selfish desires. Fudan bonno tokune. So usually our defilements, our self-desires and nirvana as seen as two opposing things. So in order to avoid contradictions, most understand that it is by extinguishing our selfish desires that we reach enlightenment. But Shinran broke this tradition and embraced the contradiction as is. Thus, Shinran saw our selfish desires and nirvana as one. That's what he's saying. Nirvana is attained without severing our selfish desires. This is especially so because, the concept of nirvana is, in fact, based, or the concept of enlightenment also, is based on our selfish desires. And without selfish desires, there's no need for us to aspire enlightenment. Right? If we didn't have that, why would we seek enlightenment? Because we have trouble, we have suffering in life caused by our selfish desire, Buddhism is teaching about enlightenment. Which means that without these problems, we wouldn't even need this. We don't even need this concept. Thus, Shinran did not separate nirvana from selfish desire, but he embraced that contradiction as this.
What is the relationship between nirvana and enlightenment?
So that is kind of going to be a tricky.
Yeah.
So, enlightenment, I think it depends on how you see enlightenment. So, there is this another argument that's going on, saying that most of the Mahayana teachings, they are not the original Shakyamuni's teaching. They are not Shakyamuni's practice. And that, even though, they're complaining about our teaching, it does kind of make sense. Because Shakyamuni realized, his anxiety and suffering that was actually caused by himself, the way he views the world. He laid out this teaching, which is called enlightenment, so that we can overcome our selfish desires that are causing our problem. And he practiced on his own, but our teaching is kind of aware of that, because we believe, especially Shinran's teaching, that we cannot live like Shakyamuni.
Yeah.
Right? If we had the ability to live like him, maybe we could attain enlightenment. But look at us, we have jobs, we have families, right? We cannot just leave the secular world. Then does that mean we are hopeless? Of course not. That is how the teaching, the story of Amida was created. So if I say created, it sounds like, oh, it was made. But again, that's not kind of the point. That the Mahayana movement occurred by the people who had the same mindset that, hey, what about us? I have to work tomorrow. I can't just meditate for hours. You guys can. What about us? That's when people started to create, these stories that would fit into their life. Of course, if you're talking about, like science, yeah, probably it's not. As I say, it's not factual, so you cannot really, prove it. So that's why some people, say that, oh, then it's fake. But as I said, because of those stories that were created, by, the people later on, it expanded Buddhism. It started to reach all sorts of people throughout the world. Not only the people who are capable, but the people who are incapable. So, in our teaching, as you are, aware of, we don't try to achieve enlightenment on our own. I mean, because in a funny kind of way, there was this monk who was saying that in order to attain enlightenment, we have to kind of get rid of our desire, because that desire itself is blocking. And I was like, wait, it doesn't make sense, because as he's saying, you have to get rid of the desire. That itself is a desire.
Yeah.
So you're using a desire to extinguish a desire, which is like an endless loop.
Yeah.
So that didn't make sense to me. So the more we try to seek enlightenment in our tradition, in our understanding, the more we will be sunk into our desires, our attachments. We're going to be attached to ourselves that is trying to attain enlightenment. That's why we say enlightenment is not something we have to go and grasp. It's actually there. And what we have to kind of, surrender. It's there, something there. So that's why we say, enlightenment is something that we receive.
Yeah. So the desire to attain enlightenment can itself be an attachment.
I'm sorry.
The desire to attain enlightenment can itself be an attachment.
Yes. So that's why we don't really I've got to put a lot of effort in attaining enlightenment. And it doesn't fit in our lifestyle, anyways. And so that's why, Shina is saying that, nirvana is not something we should, really put effort in, get rid of our selfish desire. But selfish desire is the seed of nirvana. And without selfish desire, we don't even need nirvana.
Thank you.
Yes.
That makes sense.
So Shina, he embraced the contradiction that others did not. They kind of thought that, we have to get rid of our desires and stuff. But he embraced it. In this regard, in the Langavara Sutra, the Ryogakyo, it is stated, enlightenment cannot exist apart from ignorance, nor ignorance apart from enlightenment. Since things do not differ in their essential nature, there can be no duality. This is kind of a challenging point for this Western world.
Yeah.
It's always black or white, good or bad, right or wrong. But actually, when you really think about it practically, if we didn't have ignorance, we wouldn't have any trouble, therefore we don't have to seek enlightenment. Which means that the ignorance is a proof that we need enlightenment, and if ignorance exists, there's enlightenment exists. So it's actually one. If I say one, there's going to be complaints. I don't know how to say it. So found in this way, enlightenment, which usually symbolizes Buddha, and selfish desires, which simply symbolizes us, are not separate. In other words, Buddha is not something. Maybe it's not something outside of ourselves, but can be something within. So it might not be appropriate to set Buddha as a deity or entity that is an object of worship, which is nothing more than making that separation. A very devoted Shin Buddhist, his name is Saichi. He once wrote a poem that reads, Saichi, he's actually questioning to himself. It's his poem. He's saying, Saichi, where's Buddha? And then he answers to himself, Buddha? Oh, Saichi, I myself am Buddha. That's what he says. Okay? And Saichi, he was a very devoted Shin Buddhist. He was not educated. He didn't go to school at all. But he had a very deep understanding of, the Nembutsu teaching. That
Is that an actual picture?
Yes.
Sounds like.
Yes. I struggled a lot to find his picture. But yeah, no, I did. The smaller gentleman is, Saichi. He was not educated, but he had this very deep understanding of the Dharma that the other scholars couldn't even understand what he was saying.
May I take a picture of that?
Yeah, sure. I don't know about copyrights. So, Saichi is said to be someone who deeply recognized his ignorance. That's why he devoted himself to Amida Buddha. So, of course, in this poem, he's not literally saying that he himself is Buddha. That's not what he's saying. He rather saw himself as the opposite of Buddha. However, like the relationship between darkness and light, without darkness, we cannot see the light. Same as shadows. Shadows are the darkness that proves that there's a light shining behind something. So the shadow cannot exist without the light, and in this sense, the shadow is the light and the light is the shadow. So the darkness is the light and the light is the darkness. So for Saichi, he was a shadow, that is something obstructing the light, but he saw himself and the light, which is Buddha, as one. Thus, Saichi was able to see and accept himself as the darkness of ignorance without deceiving himself, because there was a potential of Buddha, the light, living in him. And that's why he expressed, I myself am Buddha. So in this way, it is important for us to, always take the middle way and try to embrace both oppositions instead of taking extreme sides. And this Buddhist idea of middle way is important, in our everyday life as well. Whether you're a Buddhist or Christianity or whatever, it's actually an attitude that we all probably need, especially when you see the world today that there's so many conflicts, divisions. But if we can kind of practice, always contemplate on the middle way, value the middle way, then we can come to see that, as I said, my right may be wrong to other people. Your right may be wrong to me, but your wrong may be right to me. So, we can come to understand that, I may have my own righteousness, but we can also understand that, my righteousness is not the absolute answer. Others have their own righteousness. And as I mentioned, when we understand this, then we can start to listen to other people, especially those who disagree with you. So in this regard, this idea of middle way is very important, and this is actually very important in learning about Buddhism as well, because I raised those questions: is Amida Buddha a deity? Where is Pure Land? Is it a he or she? When we understand the essence of middle way, then we can come to understand that it can be both or it cannot be both. So we can kind of embrace both answers at the same time. So this is the essence of middle way. So before I move into my last one will be a little long. We can kind of of course if there's questions, it is the right time to ask now. But if not, like a bathroom break or...
Yeah. If you could finish your point, then we'll take like a 10-minute break.
Okay, yeah, so...
Oh, it is now every time you say. Okay, so we'll take about... I know this is very, very interesting, so if we could come back at about... Is 3:30 okay for everybody? Because we're getting into really nice conversations.
Yeah.
So I would like more time with Hayashi Sensei as much time as possible, so we'll take like a 10-minute break, come back at 3:30. Okay? And there's some snacks in the back, so please help yourself to some snacks. There's one of the members from the Japanese service made manju, and then there's beignets that Sharon bought. It said that Sharon was going to bring donuts, but I think she bought beignets instead, which is fine. They're still within the same family. So please enjoy yourself. There's water in the back as well.
まだ行ってます。運転してたの。
Last one is going to be more...
If we have to go over a little bit,
I want to say this before anybody else does. This is really, really good. I'll go to the mouse.
Hi. So, the last question, the last point, actually it's a question, where is Pure Land? Yeah, this is,
We take 4 or 5 Bellevue.
this is kind of a major question that everyone wonders, and I do get questions about this. So the issue of where is Pure Land relates to the question of where do we go after we die, or where does our loved one go after they die. So I would like to talk about this issue by summarizing the first and the second point. The first point is how we should not take the words in the sutra literally. And the second point, valuing the idea of the middle way that I previously discussed. The question of where do we go after we die, or where does our loved one go after death, has been an ultimate human concern, and many religions try to cope with this issue. Some faiths contend that after we die, our soul ascends, to a paradise or descends into Others believe we may achieve a rebirth in another physical body, or may merge within the divine in an eternal unity. So this is rather like a Hindu idea. The main goal is to merge with they call it Brahman. So the unity with the Brahman is the kind of the major goal. But in any case, this death is a major concern, and in many religions, try to cope with that death. In the case of Buddhism, historically, it is said that when Shakyamuni was asked by his disciples about what happens after death, historically, it said he didn't answer. We call this in Japanese muki. So he kept silent and did not give an answer. Shakyamuni kept silence because he understood well how there are things that we cannot know, and that the realization of the cause of our stress and suffering is more urgent than finding answers to questions that have no answers. Thus, Shakyamuni did not teach about what lies beyond death. However, going back to the subject of where do we go after death, Buddhist scholar says that over time, Buddhism has absorbed the Hindu idea of reincarnation. Actually, it's not Hindu. There was another religion, Brahmanism. Yes, it was the original faith in India, which transformed into Hindu. But in any case, they believed in reincarnation. And Buddhism is said to, Buddhism absorbed the Hindu idea of reincarnation over time. And when Buddhism reached Japan in the 6th AC, it also adopted the ancient Japanese view of spirits and the tradition of ancestor worship. So the Buddhism traveled from China to Japan in 538 AC. Before then, Japan had their own belief, this Japanese view of spirits and the ancestor worship. And when Buddhism came in, it kind of, all came together. Ever since, Buddhism in Japan has been performing, funerals and other death rituals. The view of what happens after death in Japan then is said to be greatly influenced by the Heian period Tendai monk Genshin, his writing called Ojo Yoshu, that is a collection of essential passages concerning birth. And in this writing, Genshin vividly depicts the image of hell and taught how the Nembutsu is the way to escape from going to hell and to be born in Pure Land. However, the concept of hell in Japan and Christianity are two different things. We have no choice but to use the word hell, but it's two different things. So Genshin, what he expressed was this Japanese image of hell. And Buddhism is said to be greatly influenced by this person, Genshin. So Genshin laid the foundation of Pure Land Buddhism in Japan. And ever since, the two opposite concepts of hell, or what we call jigoku, and Pure Land, which is Jodo, became the popular belief among the Japanese. However, even though the word Pure Land seems to imply only one Pure Land, there are in fact many Pure Lands in Mahan Buddhism. For example, the Aksarya Buddha holds a Pure Land called Abhirachi. The Mahapairavana Buddha holds Aganishta, and the Medicine Buddha holds, I can't even read this. And then Amida Buddha is Skavali. This is the pure, Skavali, the realm of bliss. So, there's many Pure Lands in Mahan Buddhism. However, today, most of the time, when Buddhists talks about the Pure Land, they are talking about Amida Buddha's Pure Land, even in Japan. With the epidemic spread of Pure Land Buddhism that occurred in Japan, the standard understanding of where the deceased go among most traditional Buddhist denominations became they go to Pure Land. However, the resident minister of Sensoji Buddhist Temple in Tokyo, Ryoji Shiori Sensei, points out how the understanding of Pure Land, particularly the location of Pure Land, has changed over time. He says, during the Kamakura period, Pure Land was understood to be in another world, separate from this world of suffering. But Nichiren Buddhism, they began to teach that this world itself is Pure Land. And today, Tendai Buddhism also teaches that this world of samsara, the suffering, is a Pure Land. So the understanding of Pure Land differs among Buddhist denominations, and it also changes with time. The understanding of Pure Land also differs between the East Honganji and West Honganji. So we are part of the West Honganji. But even this understanding differs among these two. So the Higashi Honganji, the East Honganji, or the Otaniha, leans towards the belief that Pure Land is right here. This samsara itself, or correctly, birth occurs here when Shinjin is settled. Shinjin, the full reliance on Amida Buddha's primal vow, is settled. Whereas the Nishi Honganji, the West Honganji, does not teach this idea. In a book called Ima Jodo Kangaeru, the literal translation of this book is Now Contemplating on the Pure Land, which was published by a group called Kangaku of Honganji, which is a consultative body of the chief minister to answer to problems in the doctrine. So they are the highly scholared people, and they established, they wrote this, and in it says, birth in Pure Land is not the birth we normally think of, but it is birth whose essence is no birth. It's so complicated, especially because it's in English. You have to be really direct, right? So, but it's birth which is no birth. So basically, it means it's beyond the term birth that we use. Okay. If birth is not the birth that we think of, then it might not be useful to argue about whether the birth occurs here or another world, which is reached after death. Despite the difference in the understanding of where birth occurs or where Pure Land is, the doctrine of Higashi Honganji and Nishi Honganji both holds birth in Pure Land as its objective. And if I had to answer that question of where is birth, where is Pure Land, or where does birth occur, I think I'll focus more, like the question raised. Instead of answering directly, I'll focus on my attitude in answering this question. And following our founder Shina, what would then be important is to remember that the teaching itself is for myself to listen and reflect on more than it is for me to recommend to other people or try to educate. It's for me, it's for you. So, our mother temple might not like this, but I would say that as long as you receive this hope, comfort, from your understanding of Pure Land regarding where it is, I think everything's valid. It's not something I could judge. However, my intention of talking about this issue is not to give a concrete answer, about where birth occurs or where Pure Land is, but to talk about what becomes important for us to understand when we even consider about such questions. Again, in the Shoshinge, there's a line where it says, "A great master Nagarjuna would appear in this world to crush our wrong views of being and non-being." This is where it says, "Ryuju daiji shitose, shitsu no zai ga umu ken." The wrong view of being and non-being is the human mistake of thinking that things are or that things are not. In the Flower Garden Sutra, it is also stated, "Since causes and conditions bring about everything in this world, there can be no fundamental distinctions among things. The apparent distinctions exist because of people's absurd and discriminating thoughts. In the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their mind and then believe them to be true." A very deep passage. So according to this Flower Garden Sutra, what we consider to be distinctions of right and wrong, good and bad, left and right, are no more than human bias. In this regard, Shinran says in the text of Tanisho, "I am completely ignorant of good and evil." Now, what Shinran meant is clear from a story found in a philosophy book called Huainanzi, which was written over 2,000 years ago in China. Some of you, may know the story, but this is a story of an old fortune teller who lived near the northern fort. And one day, his horse ran away. And his neighbors felt sorry for him, so they wanted to cheer him up, so they went over to his place. However, when the neighbors met him, he was not sorrowful, but instead he was trying to predict the future because he was a fortune teller. And after a moment, he said, after losing his horse, he said, "Oh, something good is going to happen to me." After a while, his horse came back, along with a few other beautiful, brilliant horses. The fortune teller's neighbors were surprised, but glad that his horse came back with other, fast, brilliant horses. However, the fortune teller next said, "This situation may turn into misfortune." A few days later, the fortune teller's son fell off of one of the horses and broke his leg. The neighbors went to visit his son, and this time the fortune teller said, "This situation may bring us fortune." After a year, a war occurred near the fort, and all the young people were sent to the battle except the fortune teller's son. The fortune teller was fortunate because his son had a broken leg and was able to avoid the fight. So this is an ancient Chinese story. It's very well known. Now, we may normally think a horse running away as a bad thing, a horse returning as a good thing, the son breaking his leg as a bad thing, and being able to avoid fighting as a good thing. But when you think more deeper, was it really a bad thing that the horse ran away so that it can be free? Or, from the point of view of the son, was it really a good thing for him to see all his friends going away to do their duties and not him? So this story teaches us how easily good changes into bad, bad changes into good. And what's more important is that the story teaches us how difficult to tell what is really right and really wrong. So when you read this story, it sounds like, the fortune teller's son breaking his leg is a bad thing, and avoiding the fight is a good thing. But as I said, it's hard to tell. What about the point of view of the son? We're talking from the, point of view of, we're talking from the outside, but what about him? So, this story really teaches us how we should be aware of how difficult they are to separate things from one another. And the same is true of Pure Land. We always want things to be clear. So we want Pure Land to be here or there. So we tend to read and interpret the sutras literally as if what they tell can be understood in black and white terms. And that's what we call dualistic thinking. But as Shinran and Renyo and other masters says, Amida Buddha is ultimately inconceivable. We have a statue, but Amida Buddha is ultimately inconceivable. That is, the ultimate nature of Amida Buddha is beyond dualistic reasoning and verbal description. So it is basically inconceivable. And you can find many statements of Shinran and Renyo, the eighth master on your right side, about Amida Buddha. For example, in the hymns of the Pure Land, Shinran states, "The majestic light transcending form is beyond description. Thus, Amida is called Buddha of inexpressible light. All the Buddhas praise this light, the cause by which Amida's Buddhahood was fulfilled." In the Shoshinge, again, Shinran says, the first line, Kimyo Muryo Junyorai Namo Fukashigiko, take refuge in the light of Amida that surpasses all thoughts and ideas. And Renyo, the eighth master of Shin Buddhism, also follows Shinran's view and says, inconceivable is the only word to describe the vow of Amida. Inconceivable, beyond thought, and ineffable. So if the ultimate nature of Amida Buddha is inconceivable, no less is the nature of the Pure Land, because Pure Land was established when Dharmakaya Bodhisattva became Amida Buddha. Now, as you know, inconceivable means that we cannot conceive it completely, so it is ultimately, beyond human comprehension. And the reason why it is beyond human comprehension is because it goes beyond human words. So there's a limit to what our words can explain, but still we have to use words. But we have to understand that there's a limit to what our words can explain. For example, there are so many Japanese words. Even when I write my Dharma talks, I think in Japanese way, and I have to translate it in my mind in English. Now, I always get stuck with these words that does not have exact English equivalent. For example, there's a word, kokoro, which is generally translated as mind. But it is more than the word mind. And you can see many examples of the use of kokoro in Shin Buddhist terms, in Shin Buddhist texts, such as Shinjing, the entrustment heart; Anjing, the ease of heart; Eshin, turning of the heart; Sanshin, three minds; Shishin, sincere mind; Busshin, the heart of Buddha. And of course, there's more. The English translation of the collected words of Shinran, that has all the doctrine of Jodo Shinshu, often uses the word mind for kokoro instead of heart. Because Professor Kimiko Gunji of the University of Illinois says, kokoro implies one's intellectual responses, or in other situations, implies one's emotional reactions, and in many cases, it connotes inclusively the mental, emotional, and spiritual states of all sentient beings. Mrs. Sakiko Yoshikawa, the director of the Kyoto University's Kokoro Research Center, also, she says, conceptually, Kokoro unites the notions of heart, mind, and spirit. It sees these three elements as being indivisible from one another. In other words, she concludes kokoro can be either heart or mind because it means heart, mind, and spirit. So the entirety is kokoro. It's not actually only the mind. So in this way, there are Japanese words for which there is no exact English equivalent. So there is a limit to what our words can explain, Thus, there are limits to what people can think and understand consciously. But the point is that this is only true of the mind part of kokoro, the mind. Crucial then is that we also have the heart, our heart part of kokoro. So just because we have limitations to what we can consciously think with our mind, that does not mean we are hopeless or lost. Once we understand the limitation of our mind, then we can open up our heart and understand with our feelings that which we cannot fully grasp with our mind. This is very an important point, that when we open our heart, then we no longer rely on the rational, logical thinking of the mind. So, we stop grasping with our intellectual calculation, and this is called hakarai in Japanese, and this is what Shina often warns us of our tendency, that we always try to generate only with our mind. But we can, grasp more with our feeling. So we can grasp with our heart things we cannot think and calculate in words. So our intuition can guide us where our logic cannot go. This is like going to an Italian opera. So when you engage opera with your heart, then the language that they are singing doesn't matter, even though we don't know what they're saying. You can still feel with your heart the dynamic in their voice, their facial expressions, and the entire atmosphere, of the theater. So it really doesn't matter what they're saying. You are feeling, you're in it. And this is done by grasping by the heart, with the heart. This idea is expressed in a Buddhist expression. This is not really a Jodo Shinshu, Buddhist expression, but it's called furitsumonji. Words and letters cannot stand. Which is usually translated as spiritual awakening cannot be experienced with words and letters. This is a Zen saying, furitsumonji. Therefore, ki is the heart part of kokoro. And when Pure Land is grasped with the heart, questions like where is Pure Land becomes a less concern. It doesn't really matter. And that being said, I like to interpret Pure Land as the home of heart. The home of heart. This idea comes from the concept of nirvana. As you know, nirvana literally means blown out, in the way the flame of the candle is blown out, and is usually understood to be the realm that one enters upon death. Furthermore, as it is stated in the collected works of Shinran, thus when one who boarded the ship of vow of great compassion, the darkness of ignorance is immediately broken through, and quickly reaching the land of immeasurable light, one realizes great nirvana. So this is written in the collected works of Shina. The land of immeasurable light is another way to say Pure Land. So, as you can see, Shina understood nirvana and Pure Land as equivalent. In addition, in early Buddhism, the word nirvana indicated the easing of the heart. The easing of the heart. For this reason, I think nirvana could have been understood as something like a home of heart, a spiritual home. By home, I do not mean like a physical home. Rather, I mean something that transcends our comprehension, the time and space, transcends time and space. Because a physical home can burn down, and family issues can take away your home. But that is not true of a home of heart, a spiritual home. It is always there, providing an ease of heart as long as you grasp it with your heart. In a section of the largest sutra, Shakyamuni's closest disciple, Ananda, describes Shakyamuni as, "World-honored one, today all your senses are radiant with joy, your body is serene and glorious, and your august countenance is as majestic as a clear mirror whose brightness radiates outward and inward." So this passage would seem to indicate what Shakyamuni looked like after he had attained an ease of heart, a home of heart. That is to say, someone with a spiritual home or a home of heart is naturally bright, peaceful, and calm, so that even though he still maintains human desires, they no longer matter as he has transcended them. That's the power, of the home of heart. Therefore, Buddhism is not teaching us how not to suffer, but how to find a home of heart in the midst of suffering. And for this reason, nirvana as a home of heart can be attained during lifetime. If we know that we are in the grasp of the home of heart, we too can receive comfort and reassurance when we are in a difficult situation, even when we approach our final days. There's an old Japanese saying that goes, "Snails always pass away at home." So this saying means that snails who carry a shell, which is their house, throughout their life, will die, or they can die in their home. And there's a story about how we can do the same. This is a story of another devoted Shin Buddhist follower, Genza. So Genza, he had a friend who was approaching his final days. And his friend was also a Shin Buddhist follower who enjoyed listening, to the Nimbus teaching, but was very, very afraid of dying. He was deeply afraid of dying. And he thought that he couldn't die with such anxiety. Desperately, he went to Genza, expressed his fear, and asked what he should do about his anxiety of dying. Genza, who was really senior, was also close to the end of his life. However, Genza, listening to his friend's distress, he simply said, "My friend, don't worry, just die as is." So the reason why Genza would say this was because he understood that we were all already in the grasp of nirvana. We are all in the grasp of home of heart. And he wanted to remind his friend of this truth that he has forgotten because of his fear. So Genza made him remember that there was nothing to worry about because he could die inside the home of heart, his home of heart, where he always has been. This is a very inspiring story, and I want to share another inspiring story about Mrs. Ayako Suzuki. So she was married to a Shin Buddhist minister, but passed away at the age of 47 due to cancer. But she wrote many inspiring poems during her hospitalization. One of which is, "I have always thought that the Dharma was something I should listen at the temple. But after I got diagnosed with lung cancer, I came to hear naturally the Dharma that comes from here and there. My bed is like the parquet of a Dharma service." So as I said, she was married to a Shin Buddhist minister, so she must have had many opportunities to listen to the Dharma. But after she was diagnosed with cancer, she came to understand what it really means to listen. Until then, she must have a fixed idea that listening was to listen to each word of Dharma talks at the temple. But she realized that the Dharma was not something to listen only with her ears and her mind, but also with her heart. And because she grasped, she engaged Dharma with her heart, the location of listening no longer mattered. For she began to receive the Dharma everywhere, even in her bed at the hospital. That's why she said, my bed is like the parquet, the first row of the Dharma service. And this realization led her to write another poem that goes, I am not proceeding towards death. I am living by receiving the now. This self that is essentially zero is living in the now. It is a conversion from subtracting to adding. Who has ever taught me this? It is a new life. My heart is dancing with joy. Every day is a new day. So Mrs. Ayako experienced a deep realization of the Dharma during her hospitalization. But of course, that did not mean that she achieved some kind of power to extinguish her anxiety, fear, and suffering, or she overcame that. Of course not. I believe Mrs. Ayako still had anxiety and fear. She's human. I think she was still fearful about her death, but at the same time, she realized how lucky and fortunate she was to have even one day to live. And this is just an amazing realization. So, her realization did not change her situation, but it certainly did change her attitude towards the situation and led her to her deepest insight. So when she was diagnosed, I believe Mrs. Ayako was lost in the world of darkness, but she found the home of heart within her. And I believe for Mrs. Ayako, the home of heart gave her great comfort in the midst of her suffering that allowed her to stop subtracting her days and now adding them up. For me, this is the working of nirvana. This is the working of the home of heart. And it doesn't matter where you are. You can be at the temple or you can be at a lecture. It doesn't matter. As long as you try to grasp with your heart, Pure Land will be always there, always. Thus, Pure Land is something that, as it transcends the time and space, and so is beyond our human mind. But by engaging Pure Land with our heart, not only our mind, but with our heart, it can give us comfort and ease of heart as we live each day of our lives. And Shinran, who deeply understood this, said that he cannot help but to say the Nembutsu with gratitude. And this is why, in our tradition, we say that the Nembutsu is our expression towards Amida Buddha that established Pure Land for all of us. In conclusion, we live in a very different historical context than that of Shakyamuni. We cannot live like him. We cannot even live like Shinran. Our today is so much more complex. And as a result, like the words that Buddhism used, awakening or enlightenment, has become so far removed from our everyday life as to seem not only impossible, but also unnecessary. As if to prove that this is the case, Buddhism today is increasingly seen as only a philosophy or a system of logic that we follow to improve our lives. I do not wish to deny the importance of Buddhism as a philosophy or a system of logic, but Buddhism is so much more. So much more. I really want to stress the importance of the joy of people at encountering, the working of the home of heart, the working of Pure Land, and receiving an ease of heart and a sense of gratitude, just like Mrs. Ayako did. With that, I would like to conclude my presentation, and I hope these 3 points that I shared today will kind of help you deepen your understanding, and this kind of aligns to the original theme to reevaluate your understanding of the teaching. Thank you.
So in a sense, when you ask where is the Pure Land, that's one of Rudolph Carnap's category mistakes. It's like asking where is the color green.
Yes. So yeah, the where is the problem.
Where is the problem?
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Hayashi Sensei. Thank you very much for coming all the way from Tri-State Denver. I know everyone has questions and everything for Hayashi Sensei, but what we're going to do is we're just going to stop the seminar now. If you have any questions, you're welcome to talk with him. But also, we have a dinner afterwards, so there'll be a no-host dinner. We'll be going to Hibachi Buffet, which is just a little ways down the street. I believe we're planning to be there around 5-ish. So until